Do you know what time it is? And in Luke 12, 54 through 56, it sounds a little harsh. These aren't my words, these are the words of Jesus. And it says, Jesus turned to the crowd and said, when you see the clouds beginning to form in the west, you say, here comes a shower. And you are right. And when the south wind blows, you say, today is going to be a scorcher. And it is. And he says, you hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky, but you can't interpret these present times. And like I said, it sounds really harsh. Those aren't my words, those are the words of Jesus. But the question tonight is, do you know what time it is? Maybe your kids are little. Maybe your kids left the nest a long time ago. Maybe you're raising teenagers now. Maybe you have grandkids. It doesn't really matter what stage of life that we're in, because as Christians, we want to see the world evangelized for Christ. Each and every one of us needs to know what's going on with the nation's youth. We've all seen the tragedies, Columbine and other school shootings, these sexting issues, the increase in suicide rates. We've seen anorexia, bulimia, we've seen teens cutting themselves and piercings and tattoos, and you may have all asked yourself at one time or another, why do they dress the way they do? They're all wearing black, and they've got these huge tattoos and piercings all over, and you can't help but think that some of them look like a pincushion with all the piercings. So what is going on with today's youth? You know, this is a generation of kids, far too many, who are lost and they are hurting. And some just yield to peer pressure and they get on the wrong path. Some are just just out and out rebellion to their parents' dismay. But for some, they're leading this lifestyle that's not entirely their fault. They have parents, obviously, but they just don't have parents. Their parents are alcoholics, they're drug addicts, they're workaholics, they're just plain selfish. Some try to be a friend instead of a parent. They're afraid if they discipline their kids, that their kids won't like them. Others throw money at their kids, buying them every desire of their heart, just so they can shut them up and they don't have to spend time with them. If these kids don't get what they need at home, they will get it on the street.
True.
And they're going to look to the world to fulfill the needs that aren't being met in the home. And many of these kids that I met on the street, they just bounced around from house to house to house, to friends to friends to friends, sleeping wherever they could, looking for a warm place to sleep because they didn't want to be alone, and in most cases they didn't want to be abused. And too many were tired of getting emotionally and physically and verbally abused and seeing mom and dad just drink or drug themselves to sleep every night. You know, if I've heard once from parents, I have heard it far too many times. They hate their teenagers. They're lazy, they're mouthy, they're useless, they're a burden, and they just want them out of their house. And maybe your parents said the same thing about you. I don't know. You know, we took in one young man whose parents, they just packed up and moved to Texas and left him here. And we took in another whose dad started him on drugs and alcohol when he was 8 years old. We had another who was a complete mess. His parents put on the church face every Sunday, and they went to church, but his dad was gay and had a homosexual partner, and the mother knew about it, and it was just a mess. This kid was a mess. There was another young man named Tony that we helped, and he slept at the foot of the cross up there at Flag Hill Park, because that's the only place he felt safe. We helped kids who lived in the drain pipe over by the skate park. And there was another that we took in. He came all the way from Hawaii to live with a family, only for them to throw him out on the street. And he was quite far from home. Yeah. And, you know, the stories can go on and on and on, heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, to say the least. You know, over the past 17 years, I've run the gambit of emotions. You know, I have been on my face for these kids. I've cried out to the Lord. I've prayed. I've been angry at what I've seen. I've fed hungry kids. I have hugged kids that were dirty and they smelled, and I cried with them. And I remember standing there on market night just shaking my fist at the enemy, and I just cried out from the depth of my being, and I said, you can't have these kids in this town.
Amen.
They belong to the Lord.
That's right.
And with my dying breath, I will do whatever I have to do to make sure that they at least hear about the Lord. And that started a Job experience in my life where I lost about everything, just watched it just go down the line. And I have been on my face in a fetal position before the Lord just in so much emotional agony over what I see going on with these kids. You know, I asked you earlier if you know what time it is. So let's talk about some of these things that are going on with the youth. What are some of the facts? How many of you are baby boomers out there?